This is a 2015 Ferrari 458 Speciale A, and some would argue that this is the ultimate modern Ferrari. Yes, I'm saying that even though this isn't a LaFerrari or an F12 TDF, just a 458. But this isn't any old regular 458, and today I'm going to explain what I mean.
I've borrowed this car courtesy of Oli, a motorsports-inspired apparel company that's launching its first product, pantwear, sometime in February. You can click the link in the description to check out Oli, their website, and their Instagram.
But on to the Speciale A. Now, Ferrari has a long history of building V8 mid-engine sports cars, going back to the 1970s and the 308. And then there was the 328, then the 348, then the 355, then the 360, then the F430, and then in 2010, Ferrari came out with the 458. But something important happened after the 458. The next model, the 488, was turbocharged, meaning that the 458 is the last naturally aspirated V8 mid-engine Ferrari sports car. And given that turbocharging sort of seems to be the wave of the future, it may end up being the last naturally aspirated V8 Ferrari ever. More importantly, this is literally the last V8 naturally aspirated Ferrari, because at the end of the 458's production run, Ferrari made a special limited version called the Speciale Coupe, and then at the end of that car's production run, they made a convertible version, this car, the 458 Speciale A, or Speciale Aperta. Ferrari claims they made only 500 of these for the entire world. This car has 600 horsepower, and current transaction prices are somewhere in the $600,000 to $700,000 range, because a lot of Ferrari enthusiasts consider this to be the end of an era, the ultimate modern Ferrari sports car. So today I'm going to take you on a tour of the 458 Speciale A, and I'm going to show you all of the interesting quirks and features of one of the best modern Ferrari models. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the 458 Speciale A, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also rounded up a list of the best version of every Ferrari mid-engine sports car model currently listed for sale on auction. Now I'm going to start with the front of the 458 Speciale A, and specifically with one of my favorite little features on this car, and that would be the Ferrari horse in the front. Now, you can see the Ferrari logo is mounted in the front of the bodywork like normal, but I've always liked where they mounted the silver horse below that at the very front on like a little pedestal, sticking out further than almost anything else, just to remind you that yes, this is a Ferrari. Now next I want to talk about the trunk. In order to open it, you press a little button on the key fob, it pops open, and then there's a little latch that you have to undo. Once you have undone it, you can get in, and you see the trunk is fairly normal, exactly what you'd expect for a car like this. Not a ton of room, but enough for a weekend getaway for the two people inside. Now, a couple of interesting things inside the trunk. Over on the left, you will find the toolkit in this nice bag held on by leather straps. You take it out, you open it up, and you will see that it is just a regular toolkit for a 458 Spider. Ferrari didn't bother giving the Speciale its own toolkit. Come on, Ferrari, why are you cheaping out on us? The other thing I like in here is the owner's manual, and I wasn't able to go through it in great detail, but I did find one interesting item I like. On page 146, it specifically says, regarding the convertible top, warning, try not to interrupt the hardtop opening closing cycle. If you have to interrupt the cycle, do not leave the hardtop in standby position for longer than 4 minutes. Where do you think they got that number? Where do you think they came to the conclusion that 4 minutes was the absolute max you could leave it? And what do you think happens if you leave it in that position for longer than 4 minutes? Now, next I want to move on to the side of the car, where I really like the fact that Ferrari doesn't bother to try and hide things that almost everybody else does. I'm going to start with the keyhole. A lot of automakers now, especially with exotic cars, are integrating keyholes into door handles and special spots so they don't break up the design on the side of the car. But Ferrari's like, nah, we're just going to stick it in the door. You just got a keyhole there. That's your thing. And that wouldn't seem so weird, except they did this with a bunch of stuff. The turn signal on the side of the car. A lot of automakers are now integrating them into the mirror to make them look cool. Ferrari just sticks a circle on the side of the car with a bulb in it. That's your turn signal. And the reflectors is the best part. The federal government here in the US mandates an orange reflector in the front and a red reflector in the back on the sides of the car. A lot of automakers are going to the trouble hiding them, putting them in headlight assemblies, angling them around the curve of the wheel arch. Ferrari's like, nope, here's your front reflector, just stuck on the car. And here's your rear reflector, just stuck on the car. No attempt to hide it or conceal it or anything. It's just what you get. Now, next up we move on to the rear of the car. And one interesting item back here is that you can't see the engine through like a piece of glass in the back. You can in a lot of Ferraris, but in the convertible hardtop models, apparently it's just not feasible, and so they don't do it. In fact, the engine compartment itself is surprisingly small. You open it up by pulling a little latch in the driver's door jamb. It pops open, and then you look inside and you can see this car's beautiful V8, but also you can see that it's sort of compact and pushed back in here. It doesn't have sort of the glorious full back engine treatment that you get in a lot of cars, in part because it's sharing space with that convertible top. Another interesting item back here is the rear fog lights. Now, rear fog lights aren't used much in the United States, but they're mandatory in Europe. You turn them on in fog or heavy rain so people know where you are, and they're not integrated into this big light cluster. Instead, look at this, they're down here at the base of the bumper, these little circles. It's an odd place for rear fog lights, but it is an interesting little piece of design. One other item I like with the lighting is the front turn signals. Take a look at these things. These have to be some of the coolest front turn signals in the industry. Little pairs of turn signals sort of in like a stair-step pattern coming down the front headlight assembly toward the headlight. That is a really cool look. And next up we move inside the car. I'm going to start with the convertible top, since you always seem so interested in this. In order to put the top up, you press this little button in the center console, and then, well, it's a fairly simple procedure. Take a look. But who would want to drive around with the top up in their beautiful Ferrari in the Southern California sun? And so, to put the top down, you pull the button in the center console toward you, and then it begins. And so now you've seen how the roof operates on a 458 Speciale Aperta. And next up, now with the top up due to the sun, I want to talk about the interior of the Speciale A, and specifically the fact that when you get inside, the first thing you notice is just how stripped down it is. This is supposed to be the lightweight, high-performance version of the 458, so it has a little extra power and a little less weight. This car is supposedly 200 pounds lighter than the regular 458 Spider, and you can tell inside where they cut some of that weight, you have no interior carpeting in this car. You pay all this money for a Ferrari and don't get interior carpeting. You also don't get a center console that has a lid. You do have a little center storage area, but it doesn't close. It's just large enough for a phone, and you can't put anything in there that you don't want to fly out. And then there's the fact that there's no glove box in this car. They've removed the glove box, and there's just this panel here instead of a glove box. Now, admittedly, there is some storage in this car, but it's all done with nets. There's a couple of little nets behind the seats, and then there are some nets on the door panels where you can put some stuff, but there's really not all that much storage in this car, and what there is lightweight net storage. Now, speaking of the door panels, they themselves are ultra lightweight. There's no high-class stitching or leather or wood trim on these things. They're just full carbon fiber, and they don't have much to them. They're just basically stuck-on door panels. And if you're looking to get out of this car, there's a nifty little carbon fiber latch that's integrated into the door pull. You just pull it, and then the door opens up. Over on the driver's door, you have two buttons sort of randomly placed in the carbon fiber. There's the button to open the front trunk, and there's another button that opens the fuel door. Now, speaking of carbon fiber, probably the strangest piece of carbon fiber in this car is in the center console, and it's this piece that has these three buttons on it: reverse, auto, and PS, which is power, start, or launch control. But the weird thing is, just look at the shape of this piece, and it isn't connected on the top, so it just sort of juts out into the middle of the car. It's very, very weird, and I've always wondered, you know, is this thing flimsy? Because it looks so bizarre, but actually you pull on it and it's really, really sturdy. Ferrari did a good job making sure that would just stay in place, but it is a very odd piece, and I don't remember ever seeing another car with anything similar to this, a sort of curved piece that comes up and doesn't connect anywhere on the top. Now, next up, another odd button in the center. If you look sort of below the window switches, you will see a circle with a button in the middle of it. It looks like a sedan with an arrow at the bottom. This button is for the front axle lifter, even though this isn't a sedan, and unlike what's shown in the button, the whole car doesn't lift up, only the front axle does. I don't know why Ferrari went with this picture on this button, but either way, if you press this, the front axle will lift up to help you clear driveways and that sort of thing a little bit easier, since this car is so low to the ground. Another rather perplexing button in this car is the lock-unlock button, which is not on the door panel or basically anywhere you'd expect it to be. Ferrari puts the door lock-unlock button up on the ceiling next to the rear view mirror, which is a place you will never see it, and it's a very strange place for that. One other odd button you'll notice in this car, if you look in the middle, you'll see the two controls for the power windows, left and right, no surprise. But if you look further down, you will see another power window control next to the convertible top control. So you might be thinking, well, where's the third window? Well, actually, there is a third window. It's the rear window behind the seats, and you can put it up or down, just like in a Toyota 4Runner. You can drop the window in the tailgate. You press that button, and the window goes down or up at your choosing, which is actually cool. It means that even if you have the top up, you can open the door windows and that window and sort of get a breeze flowing, even if you don't want to put the whole top down. It is a really cool feature, and I wish more cars had things like that. Now, in the vicinity of that rear window, there is a little plaque mounted back there that reads, International Engine of the Year, Best Performance Engine, 2011, 2012, 2014. So I'm thinking, all right, which bastards won it in 2013 that prevented Ferrari from 4 years in a row? And the answer is Ferrari, just with an engine from a different car. So rather than advertise that they won all 4 years, they just put 3 on because that's the engine in this vehicle, which seems odd. Then again, with that said, the whole best performance engine thing seems a little dubious, because back in 2006, the best performance engine was the V10 from the BMW M5, and we all know how that turned out. Now, next we move on to the climate controls, which are kind of odd in this car. There's no climate control screen. Instead, there are physical buttons, and they're sort of cryptic to use, especially the buttons that allow you to direct where you want the airflow. They just have a bunch of arrows. I counted, there are 18 separate arrows on the dial that allows you to choose where you want the airflow. It's very cryptic. In order to adjust anything with the climate controls, you move the dials around, and then there's a little red light on the little dial mover bit that shows you where you are with each individual dial. The whole thing has too many dials and buttons and too small of print to really see easily, and the entire thing is probably a little bit more complicated than it has to be. Now, with that said, it isn't just the climate controls that are strange, also the climate vents are weird, and specifically the vents in the center, which aren't just placed in the dashboard, but rather sort of jut out in this carbon fiber piece that comes to a point in the middle of the dashboard. It's really weird. The driver's side middle climate vent is on the top, the passenger side is on the bottom and angled towards the passenger. I've never really seen this before. It seems like a very complicated way to just put climate vents in the middle of the dashboard, but Ferrari had to be cool and special. Now, next we move on to the steering wheel, which has a bunch of different car functions. The idea being that Ferrari doesn't want you to have to do anything that takes your hand off the wheel in a high-performance driving situation. For example, you can flash the brights using the steering wheel, using that little button over on the left, and you can turn on the wipers and the washers using the steering wheel with the button over on the right. You can also change what drive mode the car is in and turn on the engine. But my favorite is you have turn signals on the steering wheel. The left and right turn signal are at the top, so you don't have a stalk coming off the steering wheel, but rather little buttons on the wheel that you can just activate with your thumb. Now, one other item on the steering wheel, there's a little suspension button, and when you press that, you might think it sends the car into sport suspension mode, but actually all of that is controlled with the drive mode selector over on the right. Instead, the little suspension button puts the car in bumpy road mode. You push it, and you can see the car on a bumpy road inside the gauge cluster screens. And speaking of the gauge cluster screens, I've showed you these before in my review of the Ferrari F12, which I will link in the description below, but they're not particularly exciting or noteworthy. The one on the left shows mostly car functions like trip odometer, trip speed, your fuel level, your tire pressures, that sort of thing, and it's controlled with these little controls over to the left of the steering wheel. The screen on the right is the infotainment screen. It shows what media, what radio you're listening to, and it also has your phone settings, and the navigation screen is in there. And it is controlled with these little dials and buttons on this carbon fiber piece that juts out from the center and contains the climate vents.
By the way, there's one other important button on the steering wheel. Press engine start and you can fire up this car's glorious V8 and take a listen.
And so, those are the quirks and features of the 458 Speciale A, the ultimate Ferrari 458. Now I'm going to get it out on the road and see how it drives.
All right, driving the 458 Speciale A, engine of the year. No complaints about driving this car. Dead flat in the corners, incredibly responsive acceleration. Steering is fantastic, incredibly precise. This is the archetype car. This is how they all should be. It feels amazing to drive. Really fast, obviously, incredibly quick. The shifts are amazingly fast. The exhaust it's variable. It doesn't really have an exhaust note until you get 3,000 RPM or so, or you get a little deeper on the throttle, and then when you do, it's angry. This car is so great. It's hard, really, to illustrate, especially if you've never been in like a really crazy sports car, to really explain just how perfect it is. Surprisingly, sitting at a stoplight, it seems pretty normal, which it is, until... incredibly fast and so good. It's just unbelievably enjoyable to ride. It is so tight and so good. I mean, this is just an incredibly good example of an exotic sports car. When you think about an exotic sports car driving experience, this is what you want. Ferrari has refined this formula over so many years, between the 328, 340, 360, etc., getting to this point, that they now just know how to build this thing absolutely perfectly. By the way, I wanted to point out one other benefit of this rolly-up window here is that it also can serve as a wind deflector when the roof is down, which is kind of cool, or you can just put it all the way down. Surprised by how relatively civilized it is. If you just want to drive normally, you know, it used to be that Ferraris would kind of beat you up on the road, which is fine. I mean, they were exotic cars and you kind of came to expect that. But in this car, it is rough. There's no doubt the ride is rough, but you're also sitting in a beautiful leather seat. You have the climate control going. It feels very nice. The tech is modern. The transmission is very smooth. You know, you drive a car like this and you can start to understand how and why people crash these things, because it makes you feel like you're Superman. Like there's nothing on the road that you can't do in this car, because it just feels like it will go wherever you place it, whenever you want it to, because the throttle is so responsive. So you have this incredibly responsive throttle, incredibly responsive steering, and it's like, what can't I do in this thing? Now, the biggest question on everybody's mind is going to be, is it better than the 488, which is actually the car that came after this? You know, in the past, all Ferraris have just improved dramatically with each successive model. You know, the 360 to the 430 was a big improvement. 430, 458, big improvement. But a lot of Ferrari people are saying 458 to 488, not such a big improvement. Plus, you lose the naturally aspirated engine. Here's my take after driving this car around for a little while. 488 is amazing. It's one of the best sports cars I've ever driven. But how much better can there be than this? I mean, yeah, 488 may be a little faster and a little more precise, but I don't think so much that you would notice. I think we're at the point that the only differences between these two cars can really be felt if you're on a racetrack and at the limit.
And so that's the 2015 Ferrari 458 Speciale A. To a regular person, this probably just looks like another cool Ferrari, another bright yellow exotic car. But to an enthusiast, this represents the end of an era, the last naturally aspirated V8 Ferrari, much like the F430 was sort of the end of the line for the manual transmission Ferrari. This is a special car, and now it's time to give it a Doug score.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the 458 Speciale A is very attractive, although I actually prefer the look of the regular 458. Doug fans will notice I generally give higher marks here to cars with handsome, unbroken, simpler designs that aren't over-styled, and the 458 Speciale just adds a bit more fuss to the gorgeous look of the regular 458, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Acceleration 0 to 60 is 3 seconds flat, which gives it a 9 out of 10. Handling is as good as it gets, period, and it gets a 10 out of 10. Fun factor is also incredibly strong, as this car is a total blast to drive, and it gets a 10 out of 10, in part due to its top-down capabilities. Finally, cool factor is good, but not at the very highest level. I think car enthusiasts are starting to get a bit overwhelmed by all the special editions of everything, and Ferrari has been guilty of that. The F12 TDF, the 458 Speciale, the 488 Pista, the 430 Scuderia. There are so many special editions, it's hard to know exactly what's special anymore. Still, this is a cool car no less, and it gets an 8 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 45 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. This car gets a 6 out of 10. Comfort isn't as bad as I was expecting, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Quality is high, the interior is fantastic, and Ferrari reliability has come a long way, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Practicality is mediocre, and it's even less drivable than a normal supercar due to its insane value, and it gets a 2 out of 10. And speaking of value, these would have been a 10 as a new car, but now that they cost $600,000 or more, it's a bit hard to justify. It gets a 6 out of 10 for a total daily score of 26 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 71 out of 100, which places it here among rivals, tying the GT2 RS, the Huracan, and most importantly, the 488 Spider. The 458 Speciale A is an amazing car, the highest Ferrari I've ever rated aside from the 812 Superfast, and I'm really impressed with it, and it deserves this excellent score.